I ask my students when they think the first African American theater was founded, they usually guess the 1960s. Like many people, they often assume that legislation runs prior to social movements in the arts and imagine that black theater wasn't possible before the civil rights movement. In fact, the first African American theater, the African Grove, was founded in 1821 and performed adaptations of Shakespeare and original works that we still have today. The Grove played to mixed racial audiences, and what I find amusing is that white folks, who were often rowdy and ill-behaved, had to sit in the back, separated from the patrons of color. As the Grove's manager stated, "Whites do not know how to conduct themselves at entertainment for ladies and gentlemen of color." The Grove burned to the ground in 1823, likely arson on the part of a rival white theater, and disappeared from the historical record. As a progressive theater maker and an educator committed to social justice, questions of audience are always on my mind. Who does the play assume is its audience, and how does this impact its meaning? Who do I assume is my audience when I'm teaching, and how does that impact the content I teach? Do I, in turn, know how to conduct myself as an educator of women and gentlemen of color? I thought so. In the fall of 2018, I resolved that my Intro to Theater class needed to more fully embrace the arts' potential to breed empathy and empathetic action. I embarked on a year-long project studying the neuroscience behind empathy and piloted a newspaper theater project where students would research controversial topics related to race, gender, and sexuality, write personal monologues, and then perform their partner's monologue to truly step into someone else's shoes. Final performances were overwhelming. I wept as students put on one another's personas, spoke of acts of prejudice and violence they'd endured, or awakening to prejudice against others. They wept as they heard their words performed by their classmates, and the positive feedback in the form of student reflection papers and course evaluations was overwhelming. As one student wrote, "I genuinely think if all people could have lessons such as the ones in your class, the world would be a more kind and efficient place." But would it? A piece of feedback from one of my few male black students stood out to me. He wrote, "Sadly, my metric for empathy did not go up due to this class, and it was not for lack of trying, just that I am already an empathetic person who tried to see other people's sides and understand why they make the decisions they do. Also, growing up primarily black in the South of America, my empathy meter is usually on the high end. For a black man in the South, empathy is a survival skill." In contrast, his white male counterpart wrote, "When I first started this project, I thought it was going to be a drag. I'm white. Stereotypes don't affect me. Then my partner mentioned something which struck. Why not think about stereotypes not on how they affect you, but on how stereotyping others could possibly affect them? Thinking about it from this perspective changed the whole playing ground. After reading my partner's narrative on stereotyping, the reality of the issue became much more evident to me." While this project was an important step toward transforming my classroom into an equity-minded space, something was missing. I realized I had assumed an audience like myself, a white audience, when creating development of empathy as a course objective. I had not only assumed a deficit view of the white students, I placed the burden of their education and empathy on the shoulders of the students of color. Their pain became a form of cultural capital transferred to the white students, while the students of color were given a goal that was at least remedial. In the spring of 2019, I had the great pleasure of watching This Student on Stage, starring in ACC's production of Harry and the Thief, written by a black playwright, performed by a predominantly black cast, and directed by a black director. I got to experience really showing up as an audience member for him. Moving forward, having processed and rethought my early forays into equity education, I am designing a new course, an honors-level introduction to theater that is specifically anti-racist. This course will not be an education for white folks to become anti-racist. It will assume an audience that is anti-racist, and it will center the traditions of Black, Indigenous, people of color in theater history and contemporary performance. It will value the unique cultural capital that performers and students of color bring to the table. It will ask students who do not have these frameworks to take responsibility for their own cultural deficits through supplementary readings and reflections. It will, in short, be a space that assumes an audience of ladies and gentlemen of color.